The ballroom went dead silent the moment Oh Kyung-min's lips touched her hand. Not polite silence. The kind that spreads like ice cracking, table by table, until every powerful person in that room understood that Seoul's most feared mafia boss had just chosen his maid over all of them, over his fiancée standing 20 feet away with a champagne glass tilting in her grip, over his mother whose face had gone the color of ash, over 15 years of empire building and arranged alliances and careful, calculated control. And the most terrifying part wasn't what he did. It was that he didn't look sorry. Welcome to Black and Soul TV. Please like, share, and subscribe. Oh Kyung-min had not always been a man who made ballrooms go quiet. There was a version of him that existed before the empire, before the dragon seal tattoo that curled across his collarbone, before the boardrooms and the blood and the long silences that made grown men flinch. That version of him had laughed easily, had loved deeply, had married a woman named Jisoo when he was 26 in a small ceremony by the Han River, and had believed for exactly 3 years that he had been given everything a man could ask for. Then Jisoo got sick, and then Jisoo was gone. And the man who walked out of that hospital on a cold February morning was not the same man who had walked in. Oh Kyung-min rebuilt himself the way men rebuild things after devastation. From the foundation up. He poured everything he had left into the Dragon Brotherhood, grew it from a mid-tier organization into the most feared network in all of Seoul, and closed every door inside himself that had ever let warmth in. He told himself it was strength. His men believed it was strength. And for 7 years, no one had reason to think otherwise. Until the morning, Mabel walked through his front door carrying a mop and a bucket and absolutely no awareness of the kind of man she was about to work for. She came through a cleaning agency. 3 references, background checked twice, hired by his housekeeper to manage the east wing of the Kyung-min estate while the regular staff was down with illness. She showed up at exactly 7 in the morning, which his housekeeper later reported was 7 minutes early. She wore a pale blue uniform, her locks pulled back, her eyes sharp and assessing as she took in the scale of the house without making a single sound about it. No wide eyes, no nervous fidgeting, just a calm, quiet scan of the space, and then she got to work. Oh Kyung-min didn't see her the first day. He was in his private study reviewing acquisition documents until past midnight. But the second morning, he came downstairs earlier than usual, and she was already in the kitchen, reorganizing the cleaning supplies in a way that made more sense than how they had been arranged for the past 4 years. He stood in the doorway and watched her for a moment without speaking. She didn't notice him, or if she did, she gave no indication. Just kept moving with efficient, purposeful hands, humming something low under her breath that he didn't recognize, but found himself listening to longer than he intended. He poured his own coffee, which he never did, watched her for another 30 seconds, then walked back upstairs without a word. He told himself he was simply noting that the agency had sent a competent replacement. That was all. The next day proved him wrong about that. He came home to find her on the second-floor landing, balanced on a step stool, attempting to reach a chandelier fitting that clearly required a ladder at least 2 feet taller than the one beneath her. She was stretching, her fingertips just grazing the fixture, her whole body angled with the kind of stubborn determination that ignored physics. He stopped at the top of the stairs. Something in his chest moved. Not dramatically, just shifted, the way a piece of furniture moves when someone sits on the edge of it. Quietly, without announcement, he walked to the supply closet, retrieved the correct ladder, carried it back, and set it beside hers without saying anything. She startled badly, grabbed the chandelier fitting to steady herself, which made the whole thing rattle, and then looked down at him with an expression that was equal parts embarrassment and irritation. She had not heard him approach. People always heard Oh Kyung-min approach because people always listened for him. He watched her recalibrate from shock to composure in about 4 seconds and found that interesting. Most people needed longer. "You're going to fall," he said. She looked at the ladder he had brought, then back at him. "I wasn't going to fall," she said. She said it without apology, without the nervous qualifier most employees attach to sentences directed at him. He felt the corner of his mouth do something it hadn't done in a long time. He walked away before she could see it. That evening, he told his housekeeper to keep the woman on for the rest of the month. A week passed, then another. Mabel settled into the rhythm of the estate the way water settles into stone. Quietly, steadily. She never overstayed her designated areas, never asked questions she didn't need answers to, never lingered in rooms she had already finished. But she had opinions. That became clear quickly. She rearranged the east sitting room in a way that actually allowed sunlight through the windows, something the previous arrangement had blocked entirely. She replaced a dying plant near his study door with something green and alive without asking permission, just left it there one morning like it had always been there. She left a note on his desk once, a single line, written in clean, even handwriting. The ventilation filter in the south hallway needs replacing. That is all. He read it 3 times. Then he called maintenance. He didn't examine why the handwriting stayed in his head longer than the content. The first time they had a real conversation, it was an argument. He came home to find the cleaning crew she had coordinated attempting to move a display case in his private study. He had not authorized anyone to enter that room. The case held Jisoo's photograph, a small framed thing, positioned by the window exactly where the afternoon light caught it in a way that made it look like she was still lit from within. He stood in the doorway, and his voice came out dangerously quiet. No one authorized this room. The crew scattered immediately. Mabel turned from where she had been directing them, took one look at his face, and did not scatter. She met his eyes steadily. I was told the study was included in today's deep clean schedule. It was an honest mistake. The housekeeper confirmed it. I'll make sure it's corrected. She was already moving to redirect the crew out. He noticed she had not touched the display case herself. She had only been standing near the door giving instructions. He noticed she noticed the photograph and said nothing about it. He didn't apologize for his tone. But that evening, the dying plant outside his study had been given fresh water and repositioned slightly toward the window, and he was almost completely certain he hadn't asked anyone to do that. He stood and looked at it for a long moment. Then he went inside and did not close the door all the way. Something was beginning. He didn't name it. He simply noticed that the house felt different when she was in it. Now here is the question that has been burning since this story started. When was the exact moment Oh Kyung-min stopped seeing Mabel as his maid and started seeing her as the woman he would burn his entire world down for? Because it wasn't the chandelier. It wasn't the note. It wasn't even the argument. Keep watching, because the answer is coming, and it will wreck you. If you haven't already, like this video and subscribe. The month became 2. The agency contract was extended without explanation. Mabel did not ask for one. She needed the income. Her mother back home in Lagos had a medication schedule that cost more than Mabel made in 3 weeks at her previous job, and this position paid well enough that she had stopped doing mental math every time she opened her refrigerator. She was practical about it. She did her work, did it well, accepted the extended contract, and told herself firmly and repeatedly that the way the man of the house sometimes stood in doorways watching her with an expression she couldn't fully read had nothing to do with anything. She told herself this with great determination. She believed herself approximately 40% of the time. The other 60%, she hummed too loudly and moved to a different room. Oh Kyung-min's family had been circling the marriage question for 2 years. His eldest brother Kyung-jae, who handled the public face of their business interests, raised it at every quarterly family dinner with the precision of a man who had rehearsed the argument. The empire needs succession, Kyung-jae would say. You are 37. Jisoo has been gone 7 years. It is time. Their mother, Madame Oh, said nothing at these dinners. She simply looked at Kyung-min across the table with eyes that communicated the same thing in a language that didn't need words. And Kyung-min would pour more tea, nod once in the way that meant I have heard you and I am done discussing this, and redirect the conversation. He had been redirecting it for 2 years. Then his mother took matters into her own hands. Her name was Shin Yijin, 29, educated in Paris, daughter of a shipping magnate whose trade routes complemented the Dragon Brotherhood's logistics network in ways that were frankly too convenient to be coincidental. Madame Oh arranged for Yijin to attend the annual family gala as Kyung-min's designated companion for the evening, informed him of this 40 minutes before the event, and presented it with the serene finality of a woman who had already decided the outcome. He could object, of course. He had always been free to object. His mother had simply learned over 37 years to present objections as irrelevant. He wore his black suit, met Yijin in the foyer, noted that she was elegant and composed and spoke 4 languages and was perfectly pleasant, and felt absolutely nothing. Not coldness, not cruelty, Simply nothing. Like standing in a room with correct temperature and correct lighting and no particular reason to stay. He was standing near the east terrace of the ballroom, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand, watching the gala with the detached patience of a man waiting for an obligation to end, when he saw her. Mabel had been hired for event service along with the rest of the additional staff the agency sent for the gala. She was moving through the edge of the ballroom with a tray of canapes, efficient and purposeful, her locks pinned up, wearing the same composed expression she wore when she was reorganizing his cleaning supplies. Like everything in her radius was simply a problem to be solved calmly. He watched her cross the room, watched the way she navigated the crowd without disrupting it. He set down his whiskey. He had not moved toward a person in 7 years. He moved now. He crossed the ballroom without hurry, and when he reached her, she turned and found him standing directly in front of her and startled for the second time in their acquaintance. The tray steadied. Her eyes came up to his. "Mr. O," she said carefully. He didn't say anything for a moment. Just looked at her the way he had looked at that photograph by the window, like something in his chest was trying to calculate the weight of what it was seeing. Then, without examining the impulse at all, he reached out and took her hand, turned it gently palm down, and bent and pressed his lips to the back of it. The ballroom went quiet. Yejian's champagne glass tilted. Madame O's hand stilled on her pearls. Kyung-jae said something low and sharp to the man beside him, and Mabel stood completely still, breathing in shallow increments, feeling the warmth of his mouth against her skin like a match pressed to paper. When he straightened and looked at her, his eyes were clearer than she had ever seen them, unguarded in a way that rearranged everything she had been telling herself about the 60%. He didn't explain himself to the room. He simply stayed beside her for the rest of the evening, one hand resting at the small of her back with the quiet authority of a man who had made a decision and would be answering questions about it later. Mabel's heart did not slow down for approximately 45 minutes. Later that night, the phone call started. Yijin left gracefully and said nothing publicly, which Kyung-min noted with something close to respect. His brother called twice. He did not answer. His mother sent a message that contained 11 words. "Come to the house tomorrow morning. We need to speak." He replied, "I'll be there at 10. He set down the phone, stood at the window of his penthouse looking out at the Seoul night, and felt something he had not felt in 7 years. Not happiness exactly. Something older and quieter than happiness. The particular feeling of a door that you have kept shut for a very long time swinging open just slightly on its hinges, letting in air. The next morning, the family meeting was exactly what he had expected, and he had still not fully prepared for it. Madame O sat at the head of the dining table, Kyung-jae to her left, their youngest brother Kyung-soo standing near the window with his arms crossed. She let the silence hold for a full 10 seconds after Kyung-min sat down, which was her version of opening arguments. "The maid," Kyung-jae said. "He said it the way you say a diagnosis." Kyung-min poured his own tea. "She cleans my house," he said. "That is what she does. Past tense, if you have any sense left," Kyung-jae replied. "The family cannot support this. The engagement with Yijin's family has implications for our logistics network in the South. You know this. I know that an arrangement was made without my consent," Kyung-min said, his voice completely even, "and I know that I will not be making decisions about my life based on shipping routes." Kyung-min, his mother said quietly. "Just his name. Nothing else." He looked at her. She was 64 years old and had buried a husband and managed a criminal empire through political investigations and rival incursions. And she was looking at him right now with something in her eyes that was not anger. It was fear. The specific fear of a woman who knows her child is about to choose something that will cost him. He understood it. He was not unmoved by it. But he set his tea down and looked at her steadily. "I am not asking for permission," he said. "I am telling you what is happening. And what happens next depends entirely on how this family chooses to respond to it." He left the house at 11. Behind him, Kyung-jae picked up his phone. Mabel, meanwhile, had decided that the most sensible thing she could do was resign. She composed the message to the agency while standing in the kitchen of her small apartment, telling herself she was being rational. The situation at the estate had become complicated in a way that was unprofessional and potentially dangerous, and she was a practical woman who had not come to Seoul to become entangled in something she did not have the vocabulary for. She had come to work and send money home and keep her mother's medication on schedule. That was the entire plan. She stared at the drafted message for 20 minutes and did not send it. She did not examine why. She just closed the application and made tea and stood at her window looking at the city and felt the ghost of warm lips against the back of her hand and told herself to be sensible and failed completely. The following morning, Oh Kyung-min appeared at the estate at his usual time and found her already in the west hallway. She turned when she heard him, squared her shoulders. "Mr. Oh," she started, her voice careful and professional, "about last night. I want to handle this," she said. "Last night was something I should address with you directly, and I think we should agree that." He stopped 2 feet in front of her and looked at her with an expression that made the rest of her sentence dissolve before it reached her mouth. "I am sorry if I made you uncomfortable," he said. He said it with complete directness, no deflection, no charm covering the sincerity. It was the first time she had heard him apologize for anything. It disarmed her entirely. She had prepared 3 different versions of a professional exit speech, and now none of them were accessible. "I wasn't uncomfortable," she heard herself say, and then immediately wanted to retrieve the words. His expression shifted, just slightly, the way light shifts when a cloud moves. "You weren't," he said. It was not quite a question. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her mop and turned back to the hallway and said, "Your south window ledges need to be redone. The maid from last week missed them." He stood there for a moment, looking at the back of her head. Then he walked to his study and did not close the door. The days that followed moved the way tension moves. Slowly, everywhere at once. He began finding reasons to be in rooms she was in. Not overtly, never announcing himself. He would come home in the middle of the afternoon instead of staying at the Brotherhood headquarters until evening, settle at the kitchen island with documents, and work in silence while she moved around him. He was careful not to hover. He was less careful about watching. She caught him twice. Both times he looked away with the unhurried composure of a man who had never been caught doing anything, and both times she felt her heartbeat do something embarrassing in her chest. He started noticing things. The way she rubbed the back of her neck when she was tired. The specific 3-second pause she gave before disagreeing with something the housekeeper said. That small gathering of patience before she spoke plainly. The way she looked at Jisoo's photograph when she thought no one was watching. Not with curiosity, with something quieter. Something that looked almost like acknowledgement. He didn't know what to do with the feeling that gave him. It was too large and too still to process quickly, so he left it where it was and let it settle. 3 weeks after the gala, a man named Park Tae-yong from a rival organization came to a business dinner at the estate. He was 40, charming, the kind of man who was accustomed to being the most interesting person in any room. And when Mabel moved through to clear the appetizer course, his eyes followed her across the table in a way that had nothing to do with the food she was carrying. He made a comment. Low, private, directed at the man beside him, but not so private that Oh Kyung-min, sitting at the head of the table, did not hear it. The temperature in the room dropped before anyone had fully processed what had changed. Kyung-min set down his chopsticks with a deliberate quietness that was somehow louder than a shout. He looked at Park Tae-yong for 3 full seconds without speaking. Park Tae-yong, who had survived 17 years in the criminal underground of Seoul, felt something in his chest go cold that he had not felt in a very long time. "It would be wise," Kyung-min said pleasantly, "to remember where you are and whose table you are sitting at." The dinner continued. Park Tae-yong did not make another comment. He also left 20 minutes early and did not return calls from the estate for the next month. Mabel heard about what happened from the housekeeper the following morning. She stood very still for a moment after hearing it. Then she went back to work and did not speak of it. But something had shifted in her chest, something she had been working very hard to keep from shifting, and now it had moved, and she could not move it back. That evening, she was finishing the east wing when she heard him behind her. She turned. He was leaning in the doorway, jacket off, sleeves folded back, looking at her with the particular expression that had been undoing her composure in small increments for weeks. She should say something practical. She had approximately 3 practical things ready. "I heard what happened at dinner," she said instead. He tilted his head slightly, and she held his gaze. "You didn't have to do that." He pushed off the doorway and walked toward her, stopping close enough that she could see the exact line where his composure ended and something warmer and less controlled lived beneath it. "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." She looked at him. Her heart was loud. Everything in her was loud. He lifted his hand and, for the second time, took hers. This time there was no ballroom, no audience, no performance. Just his thumb moving slowly across her knuckles while he watched her face like it was a question he had been trying to answer for longer than he was willing to admit. Her breath caught. He noticed. He always noticed. He was the most observant man she had ever been in a room with, and right now every bit of that attention was on her. And it was the most dangerous thing she had encountered in this city. She said his name, just Kyung-min, without the formal title. The sound of it in her voice made him close his eyes for 1 second. When he opened them, something in his face had changed. Something old and guarded had loosened. He raised her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, not for an audience this time, just for her, and held them there long enough that her whole body forgot what it had been doing. I am not good at slow, he murmured against her hand. But I am trying to be. For you. She didn't move away. She didn't move toward him, not yet, but she didn't move away. And in the arithmetic of two people circling something neither of them knows how to name, that was everything. Here is a question this story is demanding you sit with. Mabel came to Seoul to survive, to work, to keep her family safe. She built her walls deliberately, and she built them well. So what happens to a woman like that when the most dangerous man in the city turns out to be the first person in years who actually sees her? Think about that. And while you think about it, drop a like on this video and subscribe to Black and Soul TV because this story is about to go somewhere that will leave your heart in pieces before it puts it back together. The family did not take the development quietly. Kyung-jae came to the estate unannounced on a Thursday afternoon. Mabel was in the corridor near the front receiving room when he arrived, and she recognized him from the gala. He did not look at her the way Oh Kyung-min looked at her. He looked at her the way people look at a problem they have decided to solve. He moved past her toward the study without acknowledging her, and she heard the door close and the voices begin, low and controlled, and edged with something that did not stay controlled for long. She could not make out the words. She could make out the register. She knew what that register meant. She had grown up in a family where a certain kind of quiet before a storm was always louder than the storm itself. She finished her work in the corridor, gathered her supplies, and was heading toward the back stairwell when Kyung-jae came out of the study. He stopped when he saw her, looked at her with the assessing eyes of a man conducting an evaluation. The position here, he said, has been reassigned. Effective immediately. He said it with the calm of a man who was accustomed to problems disappearing when he named them. She looked at him. She was aware that she was standing in the home of one of the most powerful crime families in Seoul, and that the man in front of her had the resources to make her life very small very quickly. She was also aware that she was not a woman who folded under a stare. I work for the agency, she said evenly. My reassignment would come from them. Kyung-jae's expression didn't shift. It will, he said. I'm extending you the courtesy of advance notice. He moved past her toward the door. Oh Kyung-min appeared at the top of the stairs. His eyes found his brother first, then Mabel. Something moved across his face, swift and controlled, but she saw it. Kyung-jae, he said. His voice was the temperature of a Seoul winter. Kyung-jae turned. They looked at each other for 4 seconds. Then Kyung-min came down the stairs and stood beside Mabel and addressed his brother from there. Whatever you said to her, he said, retract it. Kyung-jae's jaw tightened. You are making a decision that endangers 15 years of work. You are jeopardizing the succession, the alliance, everything we have built. Then I will rebuild it differently, Kyung-min said, as I have done before. You were 18 when you rebuilt it. You had nothing to lose. Kyung-min looked at his brother, and his voice went very quiet and very certain. I have everything to lose now, he said. That is exactly why I know what I'm doing. Kyung-jae left without another word. The front door closed. Kyung-min turned to Mabel. She was looking at him with an expression he could not fully read, which was unusual. He could normally read her. Are you all right? He asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Your family is going to make this very difficult, she said. He held her gaze. Yes, he said. Are you going to let that change anything? She was quiet. Her jaw was set. The particular jaw set he had learned meant she was being stubborn past the point of sense, which he had come to understand was her best quality and her most infuriating one simultaneously. No, she said finally. Good, he said. Then nothing has changed. But things were changing. They could both feel it. The way a sky changes before rain, pressure building in the atmosphere, invisible but total. He took her to dinner the following week. Not to any of the exclusive restaurants where his face was known and his table was reserved before he called. To a small Korean-Nigerian fusion place in Mapogu, the kind with plastic-covered menus and a television mounted too high on the wall, and food that arrived fast and tasted like someone had cooked it specifically for you. He wore a gray sweater and dark trousers and looked almost ordinary, except that he held the door open and pulled out her chair with the practiced ease of a man who was powerful in every context. And she told herself she was not affected by that and was lying. They talked for 3 hours. She told him about Lagos, about her mother's laugh, the specific kind that started in her stomach, and about the street outside her childhood home that smelled like groundnut oil and rain simultaneously. He told her about Jisoo. Not in detail, just enough. Enough that she understood the shape of what he had lost, the way you understand the outline of something in a dark room without seeing its color. She didn't offer hollow comfort. She simply listened in the way she did everything, completely, without pretending. He found that he wanted to keep talking. He could not remember the last time he had wanted to keep talking. They stayed until the restaurant was closing, and the owner was turning off lights pointedly around them. And Kyung-min looked at the situation and found it funny in a way that surprised him. That pure, unguarded laugh that rose from somewhere low in his chest and made Mabel stop breathing for a second because she had not heard it before, not directed at something real, not like that. He noticed her noticing. He didn't look away. Neither did she. The walk back to his car was slow even though it was cold, because neither of them suggested walking faster. The weeks continued. He learned that she reorganized things when she was thinking too hard, and that she always apologized to plants when she had to move them. A small murmured sorry as she shifted a pot, and that she carried her mother's photograph folded in her wallet and touched it through the leather when she thought no one saw. She learned that he slept 3 hours less than a person should and compensated with a particular expensive tea that he drank in his study while reading contracts at 2 a.m., and that he sometimes stood in front of Jisoo's photograph in the early morning before the house woke up, not grieving actively, just present, just acknowledging. She came downstairs for water at 6 a.m. one morning and found him there and did not say anything about it. Just went and got her water, and on the way back set a second cup of that expensive tea on the desk beside him without a word. He stared at it for a long time after she left. Something in his chest settled like a stone finding the bottom of deep water. He kissed her for the first time on a Tuesday evening. It was raining. She had stayed late finishing a reorganization she had started, and the rain had come down too hard to walk to the bus stop sensibly, and she was standing at the back door watching the downpour when he appeared behind her with his jacket in his hand. She turned. He looked at her face in that particular way, the way that always felt like an inventory, like he was checking that she was still there and still whole. Then he stepped closer and reached up and tucked a lock that had come loose back from her face, his fingers grazing her cheek, and the look on his face was so unguarded that she felt her composure come apart like paper in water. He said her name. Just that. Mabel. She said nothing. She was not capable of it. He leaned in slowly, with the patience of a man who had learned the value of slowness, and kissed her with a gentleness that was completely at odds with everything the city believed about him. She felt it everywhere, every defended corner, every deliberately built wall. He kissed her like he had been careful with something for 7 years and had decided to stop being careful tonight. She kissed him back and her hands found the front of his shirt and held on. The rain kept coming. Neither of them moved away from it. Later, sitting in his kitchen with tea going cold between them, she felt the fear arrive. The specific fear that comes after something enormous. She looked at his hands on the table. "This is going to cost you something," she said. He looked at her. She met his eyes. "Your family, the alliance, the succession, your mother. It's going to cost you all of it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know." She felt her throat tighten. "I didn't come here for this," she said softly. "I came here to work." "I know that too." He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "What you came for and what you found," he said, "can coexist." She looked at him. She wanted to believe that. She was afraid of how much she wanted to believe it. She nodded once. Slowly, his hand stayed over hers. The danger arrived faster than either of them expected. Kyung-jae had been making phone calls. Madame Oh had been having conversations that no one reported to Kyung-min directly, but whose outcomes began appearing in small ways. The agency received a pressure call. The landlord of Mabel's apartment building received a visit. Small incursions, carefully placed, designed to tighten the space around her without appearing directly. Kyung-min's intelligence network flagged 3 of the 5. He tightened her security without telling her. 2 of his most reliable men positioned near her building. Her route to the estate monitored. He told himself he would tell her soon. He wanted 1 more week of the thing they were building before the siege began properly. He did not get the week. It was a Friday. Mabel left the estate in the early afternoon for an errand, a short walk to the pharmacy 2 blocks from the estate for her mother's medication refill, something she had done 4 times before. His men were stationed outside. They were watching. But the car came from the opposite direction and moved too fast, and the men were out of position by 40 seconds, which was 40 seconds too many. The door opened. 2 men. Not violent immediately, just firm. Get in the car, Mississippi. This is a family matter. Mabel had not survived 31 years on 2 continents by ignoring the specific quality of danger when it announced itself. She was already moving before the second man reached her. She went sideways into a narrow pedestrian alley between 2 buildings that the car could not follow her into. She ran. Not elegantly. Entirely effectively. Her phone was in her hand. She called Kyung-min. He answered on the first ring. She could hear the shift in his breathing the moment she said his name at that pitch. Where are you? She told him. Stay moving. Keep the line open. I'm coming. He was already out the door. He had his fastest men deployed and a car on her block in 11 minutes, which was the fastest 11 minutes of his life. He found her in a coffee shop 2 streets over, sitting in the back corner with her hands wrapped around a cup of something hot. She wasn't drinking, her eyes on the door, her jaw set with that particular stubborn composure that meant she was holding herself together through sheer refusal to do otherwise. He came through the door, and she saw him, and something in her face changed. Not breaking down, just releasing, slightly, the way you release when you have been holding something very heavy and someone else finally reaches for it. He crossed the room and sat across from her and looked at her face for evidence of harm, and found none, and then looked at her for a different reason entirely. The reason being that she was here and safe and looking at him, and it was the most important thing that had happened to him in 7 years. He reached across the small table and took both her hands. She let him. Are you hurt? She shook her head. His jaw was tight. His men had given him partial information on the way over. He already knew what had happened, and he already knew the source. He kept his voice even for her sake. I'm going to handle this, he said. She looked at him. Your family did this, she said. It was not an accusation. Just a fact, laid down plainly. He held her gaze. Yes, he said, and I am going to handle it. She was quiet. Then she said, quietly and without drama, I need to know that this doesn't happen again. He looked at her. His voice, when he spoke, was the quietest and most absolute thing she had ever heard. It will not happen again, he said. This is my promise to you. And now stop and ask yourself this. At what point does a man choose the woman he loves over the family that built him? Because Oh Kyung-min is standing at exactly that crossroads. And what he does next is what separates him from every man who came before him. Like this video if you feel that. Subscribe to Black and Soul TV and keep watching because the moment of reckoning is here. He drove her back to the estate himself. He placed 2 men inside her building and 4 outside. He made 3 phone calls on the way. Then he went to his mother's house. Madame O received him in the front room. She was composed, which she always was. She offered tea, which he declined. He sat across from her and looked at her for a moment, and she met his gaze with the patience of a woman who had faced harder conversations than this one. He said, call it off. She said, I don't know what you mean. He said, with a quietness that made the air in the room go flat and still, Mother, I know everything. I know about the agency call. The landlord. Today, he watched something shift behind her eyes. Not guilt exactly. Something more complex. The calculation of a woman who had made a decision and was now measuring its cost. She said, I did what was necessary for this family. He said, you put a woman in danger. His mother said, you are choosing a woman over your family's future. He said, I am choosing the right thing. These are not always different. Madame O looked at her youngest son, at the man he had become after the devastation and the rebuilding, and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, if she comes to harm again because of decisions made under this roof, what happens to this family? He looked at her steadily. Then everything changes, he said. Not as a threat, as a fact. She looked at him. He was 37 years old, and had built an empire from nothing and had not needed her since he was 19, and they both knew it. She said nothing more. He rose, replaced his chair carefully, and left. In the car on the way home, he called Kyung-jae. He didn't raise his voice. He said everything that needed to be said in the same quiet that he used for the things he meant most. By the end of the call, two things were established. The arrangement with Yijin's family was formally, publicly, irrevocably dissolved, and any further action toward Mabel or her family would be considered an act against him personally, with all the consequences that carried inside their world. Kyung-jae said nothing for a long time after the final statement. Then he said, "You understand this resets everything we've negotiated with the South networks." Kyung-min said, "Then I will renegotiate." From a position of someone who does not owe anyone a marriage. He hung up. He drove home. The estate was lit from the inside the way it always was in the evening, every window showing the warm, particular glow of a house that someone was living in properly. He sat in the car for a moment and looked at it. Then he went inside. Mabel was in the kitchen. She had, apparently, decided to cook, a decision that his housekeeper was watching from the doorway with an expression of profound uncertainty that Kyung-min understood completely, because Mabel in command of a kitchen was a force of nature that reorganized the space around itself. She was making something that smelled like groundnut soup and jollof rice, and the combination of that smell and his Seoul kitchen did something to him that he had no precise language for. She turned when he came in, looked at him. He looked at her. He said, "It's done." She said, "All of it?" He said, "All of it." She turned back to the stove for a moment. Then she said, "You didn't have to dismantle everything for me." He came to stand beside her at the stove. He said, "I know." She looked at him sideways. He was looking at the pot with an expression that was unguarded and warm and entirely unlike the face Seoul knew. She said, "Your family is going to need time." He said, "They've had 7 years of time. Now they'll adjust." She made a sound that was almost a laugh. He heard it. He tilted his head and looked at her, and the look was enough. It was always enough to make her feel something she had stopped letting herself feel for a very long time. Wanted. Specifically. Completely. Not as a function or a convenience or a solution to someone else's problem. Just as herself, Mabel, exactly as she was, with all her practical stubbornness and her locks, and her plan apologizing and her mother's photograph folded in her wallet. Just as herself. She turned to face him. He was close. He was always close lately, in the way that happened when two people stopped pretending there was a reason to maintain distance. She said his name. He said, "I know." She said, "That's not what I was going to say." He said, "I know that too." He reached out and tucked another loose lock back from her face, that same gesture from the rainy Tuesday, and kissed her in the kitchen with the jollof rice going and the city going outside the windows and the housekeeper eventually, discreetly, finding somewhere else to be. The months that followed were the quietest good thing Oh Kyung-min had experienced since he was 29 years old. His mother required 3 weeks and 1 dinner before she began to look at Mabel with something other than assessment. It was the dinner where Mabel arrived with a dish she had cooked, because she had heard from the housekeeper that Madame O had a sweet tooth and had made something accordingly, and set it on the table without ceremony or performance, just the simple directness that she applied to everything. Madame O ate 2 servings. She said nothing complimentary, but she accepted when Mabel offered to write down the recipe, and in the language of Madame O, that meant everything. Kyung-jae took longer. But Kyung-jae had always been more invested in outcomes than emotions, and when the renegotiated South Network agreements came back better than the original arrangement, his objections became quieter and then became something that looked, from a certain angle, like grudging respect. Mabel's mother arrived in Seoul in March. Kyung-min had arranged the flight. He had also arranged the apartment 2 streets from the estate, on the 3rd floor with southern exposure because Mabel had mentioned once, in passing, that her mother loved the afternoon sun. He did not tell Mabel the apartment had southern exposure. She found out when she brought her mother to see it, and her mother walked to the window and turned around with wide eyes and said, "This child arranged sunlight for me." Mabel looked at the window, looked at the afternoon light filling the room. She pressed her hand over her mouth for a moment. Then she looked at Kyung-min, who was standing in the doorway with his hands in his pockets and an expression that was trying to be neutral and failing completely. She crossed the room, and he opened his arms, and she walked into them and stayed there for a long time. Her mother watched from the window with the afternoon sun on her face and said nothing. She did not need to say anything. Some things are louder than words. The night he proposed, there was no performance, no restaurant, no audience. He had learned from her that she did not want things performed at her. She wanted things offered, directly, with both hands. He asked her on the estate balcony in November, with Seoul spread below them and his breath clouding in the cold air, and a ring he had chosen alone without his mother's input or his brother's advisement. Just himself standing in a jeweler's shop thinking about the specific woman he was choosing and what that choice meant. It wasn't large. It was precise and beautiful and not at all what anyone who knew him would have expected. He said, "I have spent 7 years being careful with everything except the things that mattered." He said, "You matter in a way that I don't have sufficient language for." He said, "Stay?" Just the word. Stay? She looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "You're going to have to do better than that." He said, "Stay with me." She said, "That's marginally better." He said, "Mabel." She said, "Yes." He slid the ring onto her finger. She looked at it. He washed her face. She said, "It's exactly right." He said, "I know what you like." She said, "You know everything." He said, "Not everything." She looked at him. He said, "I'm still learning." She smiled. It was the smile that had started all of this, the specific warmth of it, and it did to him what it had always done, made everything else irrelevant, made the empire and the city and the careful controlled quiet of 7 years of closed doors dissolve into something simple and enormous. He kissed her in the cold November air, and she kissed him back, and Seoul went on below them, bright and humming and entirely unaware that it was happening. They were married in April. Small. Exactly as she wanted. Her mother in the front row. His mother 2 seats over, looking at Mabel in the simple ivory dress with an expression that had, somewhere over the preceding months, completed its journey from assessment to something that was genuinely close to love. Kyung-jae and Kyung-soo both present. The ceremony was brief, and the dinner after lasted 6 hours because Mabel's mother had taken over the catering arrangement 3 weeks before the event, and no one had found a way to diplomatically redirect her, and the food was the best thing anyone in attendance could remember eating. Oh Kyung-min spent most of the reception watching his wife. The word was new in his mouth. Wife. Heavy in the specific way of things that are exactly the right weight. She caught him watching at one point and raised an eyebrow, that familiar expression, the one that said, "I see exactly what you're doing." He didn't look away. She shook her head slightly. He smiled. She smiled back and turned to continue her conversation with his youngest brother, who was clearly already completely devoted to her, a development that had taken approximately 2 dinners and was now irreversible. Kyung-min picked up his glass and stayed where he was and let the feeling be what it was. Complete. He had not used that word for himself in 7 years. Tonight it fit. 7 months later, she told him in the kitchen on a Sunday morning. She was making tea and he was reading, and she said his name in a particular way that made him lower the documents before she had finished the sentence. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she said it. He set the documents down. He stood up. He crossed the kitchen and took her face in his hands and looked at her for a long time in the way that she had learned meant he was measuring something too large for immediate language. Then he said, "Mabel." She said, "I know." He said, "I'm going to be entirely insufferable about this." She said, "You're already insufferable about most things." He said, "Considerably more insufferable than usual." She said, "I know that too." He kissed her forehead, then her cheek. Then he held her against his chest, and she felt his heartbeat, steady and present and entirely real, and she let herself stay there without measuring the cost of it because she had learned, over these months, that staying was not the same as losing. That choosing something completely was not the same as giving yourself away. That the most dangerous thing she had encountered in Seoul had turned out to be the safest. She pressed her hand flat against his chest. He covered it with his own. Outside, Seoul hummed. Inside, everything was still. The good kind of still. The kind that means nothing is broken. The kind that means you are home. Stories like this one exist because love that costs something is love that means something. And you deserve to believe that the version of this story that's meant for you is still on its way. Like this video if it moved you. Subscribe to Black and Soul TV and turn on your notifications.